Hello and welcome. I'm Jono Hayes and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Arabiya studios. And these are our top stories. President Trump says the Gaza ceasefire remains in place. That's despite recent strikes as Witkoff and Kushner arrive in Israel. 8 priceless jewels are stolen from the Louvre Museum as police continue to hunt down the culprits and to recover the artefacts. And the Epstein victims speaking out from beyond the grave. Virginia Giuffre's memoirs are revealed, detailing damning allegations against Prince Andrew. US President Donald Trump says a ceasefire in Gaza is still in place. That's despite Israeli military strikes against Hamas over the weekend. The IDF have accused Hamas of breaching the deal after 2 soldiers were killed in Rafah. Meanwhile, Hamas say they're committed to the ceasefire. Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, have travelled to Israel today to meet with members of Netanyahu's government. Here's a reminder of what President Trump told reporters on board Air Force One.
We want to make sure that it's going to be very peaceful with Hamas. And as you know, they've been quite rambunctious. They've been doing some shooting, and we think maybe the leadership isn't involved in that. Some rebels within. But either way, it's going to be handled properly. It's going to be handled toughly, but properly.
Is the ceasefire still in place?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is.
Now, for more on this, I'm joined by Asher Fredman, who is a former Israeli strategic affairs official and the executive director of Misgav Institute for National Security. Asher, thanks for joining us. First of all, from your perspective, how fragile is this ceasefire deal right now? Are we really looking at a lasting truce, or is this just a pause in the fighting?
Thank you for having me, and good evening. Israel is committed to the ceasefire. That's why after responding to Hamas's attacks against Israel soldiers, they restored the ceasefire and ceased the attacks. But remember, the first point in Trump's 20-point plan is Gaza will be a de-radicalized, terror-free zone. And we've seen over the last few days how Hamas has restored its rule over the parts of Gaza that Israel is no longer in, how it's executed in broad daylight dozens of Gazans, and how it's returned to the streets carrying its weapons. Israel remains committed to the ceasefire, but I would agree with your assessment that it is indeed fragile.
Both sides are accusing each other at the moment of these violations. Who's got the leverage right now, though, in maintaining that calm on the ground that's also important?
Israel, in accordance with the ceasefire, retreated to what's known as the yellow line, which President Trump and his team drew on the map of Gaza. And Israel made very clear, we are going to withdraw. We will no longer be present in the areas where we have withdrawn. We will not act militarily in those areas. But any attempt by Hamas to attack our soldiers on that line will be met with a military response. And that's exactly what Israel has done. But the bigger question, I think, really goes to the heart of what's happening here is Hamas going to be demilitarized? Who's going to demilitarize Hamas? Are Saudi soldiers, Emirati soldiers, Qatari soldiers, Turkish soldiers, Indonesian soldiers really going to go in and take away Hamas's weapons? Is Hamas going to just decide to hand over its RPGs and its Kalashnikov rifles? Obviously, we don't want U.S. boots on the ground. So who is really going to demilitarize Hamas? I think that's the most important question right now.
Well, look, we know that the US are heading there. And what role do you think the envoy from the US, so like Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, what are they going to play in stabilising this very, very fragile situation right now?
We have to look at, first of all, we have to be thankful, express deep gratitude to both Witkoff and Kushner for bringing about the release of the 20 living hostages, some of the dead hostages, although Hamas is still holding some of the bodies. And now they're trying to keep, understandably and correctly, trying to maintain the ceasefire. One of the things that led to the successful outcome of the first stage of the deal was when they put pressure on Qatar. And they told Qatar, you need to bring Hamas to the table and you need to get Hamas to agree to the first stage of the deal. And lo and behold, when that pressure was put on, Qatar was able to deliver Hamas. If they truly want to get to a stage where Hamas demilitarizes, gives up its weapons, one key strategy is going to put real pressure on Qatar for them to put real pressure on their Hamas allies or Hamas partners.
Let's talk about the humanitarian crisis. We're hearing a lot about this in the last couple of days, once again in Gaza. What is the immediate priority for aid agencies? So what have Israel actually allowed in that we know of in terms of aid?
So Israel initially, again, in accordance with the agreement, allowed in hundreds of trucks of aid, and that aid continues to come into the Strip. It was restricted during the fighting. It was also restricted to a degree due to the fact that Hamas is not keeping its part of the agreement in terms of not returning the bodies of murdered hostages, which it holds or which it knows about their location. There's some it doesn't know, and there's some where it does know of their location, but it's still refusing to return them to Israel. But in general, Israel is not opposed in any way to aid reaching Gazan civilians. The problem is when this aid reaches Hamas, and food is one thing, fuel is another, cement, heavy equipment. There's a real fear that cement, reconstruction materials that enter the Gaza Strip will be used by Hamas to rebuild its military infrastructure, to rebuild its capability to attack Israel once again. And that's a very complicated issue that Israel, the United States, and the other mediators need to work out in order to ensure that Gaza does not become once again a threat to Israel.
The feeling on the ground in Gaza right now is that Hamas are trying to get those victims back. And as you said, you don't believe that they know the location of those, that they do know the location of those victims. They're just simply not returning them. Yeah. My question is, what is the feeling on the ground from Israel? Do they feel like at least some headway has been made in returning the bodies of these hostages?
Well, so, I mean, we can look at the facts. The 20 living hostages are home, and that was a moment of great joy, great national joy. And Israel's been very happy that a number of the murdered hostages have been returned. 16 are staying in Gaza. And again, our best assessment, I don't know the intelligence, but our best assessment is that some of them, Hamas does know where they are and could return them on their own. And some of them, it doesn't. And there's that mechanism that is supposed to allow coordination for that. But Israel's demand right now is that Hamas, according to what it agreed to in its conversations with the United States, the other mediators, immediately return all of the bodies that it knows where they are so that they can be brought for a proper burial here in Israel.
Asher, my question is, what do Hamas actually have to gain by withholding the bodies of deceased hostages? What benefit could it possibly, what leverage could it possibly give to Hamas at this point when Hamas are the ones who are saying that they are willing to go to the table and they are trying to keep their end of the bargain, but it's simply not possible?
Hamas's goal is to reestablish its control over the Gaza Strip. Hamas has no real intention of giving up control, of giving up its arms. It may allow for some sort of technocratic government to, be in charge of garbage collection or of delivering the mail, but Hamas fully intends to remain the dominant, controlling power in the Gaza Strip and to rebuild its military capabilities. And to that end, it's going to play all kinds of games and tell all kinds of stories and do whatever it can to string out the implementation of the various stages and to see what it can, further concessions that it can extract. For example, Hamas would very much like large amounts of heavy equipment to enter the Gaza Strip. Why? So they can use those bulldozers, presumably to look for hostage bodies, but also to rebuild its tunnels, to rebuild its warehouses, to rebuild its terror infrastructure. So it has a strong incentive to withhold the bodies in order to have the heavy machinery come in, which it can use for all kinds of purposes, including for its terror purposes as well.
Let's talk about the signs that we'll be watching out for in this somewhat of a ceasefire at the moment. What are we watching out for here to find out if this ceasefire is going to hold or if it's about to truly unravel? The
first stage of the ceasefire, or at least to a large part the first stage, as you mentioned, the release of the living hostages, Israel's withdrawal to the Blue line has happened. And now the next stage is supposed to happen. And the most critical element of the next stage is quite complex. You have a stabilization force and a technocratic government and a board of peace, but none of that will happen if Hamas does not disarm. As long as Hamas remains the dominant military power, then again, do we really think I would not, as an Israeli, I would not want to see not American troops, not Saudi troops, not Indonesian troops entering Gaza and clashing with Hamas in order to remove their arms. I think that's highly unlikely to happen. So the real question is Hamas going to lay down its arms? Are the leaders are they going to, renounce terror and accept peace? Are those who don't want to do that, are they going to leave Gaza? I'm skeptical. On the other hand, to be fair, President Trump, Mr. Kushner, Mr. Witkoff, Special Envoy Witkoff, did, against all expectations, deliver the first stage of the hostage deal. And I think that Israel should continue to remain as committed as possible to the hostage deal, and let us see whether or not progress can be made on Hamas disarming itself. But that remains to be seen.
You mentioned a bit, Asher, about a military force on the ground, but I suppose the closest thing we have currently from an international perspective is President Trump's convoy, an envoy who are there, Witkoff and Kushner, who are currently involved. Their presence there, is that actually going to hold any diplomatic weight, or is it somewhat of a symbolic gesture?
No, I think that Special Envoy Witkoff and Jared Kushner have shown their ability to work with the leaders of the region to get really to I think to make to achieve the impossible but the realistic. I think their presence is important. I think that on the Israeli side, it's critical to present to them the real I would say the motivations or the intent of Hamas. I think that we've seen in a few cases that excuses that Hamas has made were adopted. I think that's problematic. Again, it remains to be seen, but Hamas, as we remember, is a Muslim Brotherhood, highly ideological, extremist terror organization whose basic constitution calls for the destruction of Israel. That has no qualms, not about killing Israeli babies and not about shooting Gazan children in broad daylight if it thinks it threatens their power. Will Hamas change? I don't know, but I definitely think that the Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff's presence here reflects President Trump's deep commitment to doing whatever he can, whatever the U.S. administration can do to, on the one hand, advance this 20-point agreement, and also to, as President Trump has made clear, ensure that Israel's security is protected.
Asher, as you and I sit here and back and forth about this, you have to remember that on the ground there is the rising civilian death toll. How are ordinary Israelis viewing this ceasefire right now? Is there broad public support for it still, like we saw in week one?
I do think there is broad public support. Obviously, the fact that 2 of our soldiers were killed by Hamas is leading to some people to call for a more robust response. I think Israelis are also asking themselves, why is the international media not covering the fact that Hamas, with the international media that counted every Gazan that was killed in the course of the war by Israel, seems to be for a large part ignoring the dozens of Gazans that are being executed in broad daylight, in cold blood by Hamas. And that doesn't seem to interest, no Jews, no news. That doesn't seem to be particularly interesting to the international community, international media. But overall, Israelis are, again, deeply grateful to President Trump for his strong support for Israel, for the release of the 20 living hostages. And Israelis deeply, deeply want to see every single one of the murdered hostages returned. And I think that there is going to be strong support for that ceasefire as long as we see progress on that front, hopefully as quickly as possible.
Asher Fredman, there we must leave it, former Israeli Strategic Affairs official and also Executive Director at the Misgav Institute for National Security. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's take a look at some of the other stories that are making the headlines today. President Trump has hosted Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese at the White House. It's the first visit since Trump's re-election this year. The two leaders have discussed things like rare earth minerals, trade and military equipment. Additionally, the US president has reportedly urged Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky to give up huge portions of land. Trump encouraged Russia and Ukraine to leave it the way it is right now and negotiate later down the line. Zelensky is expected to travel to the UK later this week for a coalition of the willing meeting in London. Millions have taken part in anti-Trump protests as part of the so-called No Kings demonstration. Over 2,000 rallies were planned across the country. Trump later shared an AI-generated video of himself as a king flying a plane, dropping brown liquid on protesters, seemingly mocking those involved. Saudi Arabia has welcomed a ceasefire agreement between Afghanistan and Pakistan. That's after a deadly border clash between the two countries. The ceasefire was agreed in Doha on Friday, with more discussions scheduled for later this week. And millions of Indians across the world are celebrating Diwali today, also known as the Festival of Light. Homes are decorated and sweets are exchanged. While the festival is largely celebrated by Hindus, it draws people from different cultures and communities and faiths to join in the celebrations. The Louvre Museum in Paris remains closed today after thieves took off with priceless artefacts over the weekend. Police continue to search for the culprits in a race against time. The missing French crown jewels include a tiara, a sapphire necklace, a sapphire earring, and speaking earlier today, the French Justice Minister, Darmanin, said the French people feel like they've been robbed too. Take a listen to this.
I think all of the French people this morning, or a large majority of them, feel like they have been robbed, in the same way as when the Notre Dame was burning. It was our church that was burning, even when we weren't Catholic. Having such important jewelry stolen in such an incredible way, it of course looks bad, and it also gives a very negative image of France. There are many museums in Paris, many museums in France, with priceless values in these museums. The fact that these display cases were not secured, it's a question that we can ask.
We're now going live to Paris to speak about this. Our correspondent, Anelise Borges, joins us. Anelise, this really is something like from a movie. The theft has been called the theft of the decade. Walk us through exactly how the thieves managed to breach security at what we know is one of the most heavily guarded museums in the world.
Actually, the theft of the century, according to some local media here in France, who are talking about precisely the value of the pieces stolen. Nothing compares. And as you said, the objects include crown jewels and the crown of Napoleon's wife. That particular object has been retrieved and is damaged. Authorities say they believe that was lost by the thieves as they were trying to run away. But what happened here was on Sunday, 9:30 in the morning, 4 individuals, according to French authorities, have parked right behind me, 2 in scooters and 2 on a truck. That truck was mounted with a ladder. With that ladder, they accessed the first floor of the building you see behind me and broke that particular piece of glass. They then penetrated the gallery and took all the objects that you described. In total, 8 objects were stolen from the Louvre. Some very, very precious pieces of jewelry. The 4 individuals then ran away in those scooters and are still missing. This is nothing short of spectacular, especially if you consider that we are right in the middle of the French capital. In one of the roads that's the most clogged always with traffic. So the fact that they managed to get away with this and that they're still missing has impressed pretty much everyone here. You can't really see, but all around me, there are people with their phones out filming or taking selfies of what has become a tourist attraction in itself. And all in all, those 4 individuals took 7 minutes, 420 seconds to get away.
Look, one art detective has described this as a race against time, and we're hearing that a lot in the newspapers today. Why is there a window there of 1 week? Why is that so crucial for the investigators who are trying to recover the jewels before what they're saying is that they disappear forever?
Well, the consensus here is that none of these pieces will be sold as they are with so much publicity. No one would risk actually purchasing those tiaras and those necklaces and earrings. And so what they are hoping to avoid is that these perpetrators melt these pieces down, dismantle them to then sell the parts. That could indeed happen. It would take some time. Some experts say around a week is what it takes to preserve the pieces and then put them in the black market.
Anelise, surely they're worth a lot more intact as they are because of the significance of these. We're talking about the French crown jewels. These aren't just ordinary stolen goods that we're talking about here. They've got deep historical significance again, which is why we've seen such global attention and also such pressure as well. But I'm guessing that the French authorities must be really feeling the heat of this in order to try and retrieve them.
Absolutely. It is a race against time, and it is a lot of pressure on authorities. We've seen over the last day and a half, pretty much everyone giving interviews. French President Emmanuel Macron released a statement saying that was what has been lost here was a piece of the heritage of France and that everything was going to be done to actually recover it. But this is a country, as you know, plunged in political crisis after political crisis. And so Emmanuel Macron didn't really need this one. many people are actually very, very concerned about the security in these places. The French Interior Minister went on the radio today to say that there was actually more security in place following demands by staff here and by the direction of the Louvre, saying that they needed more help. This had been in place, he said, for at least a year now, but clearly it wasn't enough. Last June, there was a strike here in this museum, staff saying that they were understaffed, that they needed more people, but that wasn't precisely or specifically focused on security. And so there are so many questions right now, and this is very much a country in shock. The Interior Minister also compared this to the Notre Dame fire a couple of years ago, saying that that was a piece of France that had been lost. Well, this is another piece of France that has been lost. Of course, France has a very complex relationship with its monarchy and that part of its history. But this is a country that is very much attached to its history in the sense of the documents of the past. And so this is something that they are absolutely not going to forget. If these pieces are gone forever, Emmanuel Macron will definitely be in even more troubled waters.
Anelise, from what you're hearing there in Paris, is there any early indication who might actually be behind this? Because it is a Netflix TV series waiting to happen. Is it a sophisticated art gang? Is it an insider? Is there an international network that's already known to the authorities that could be behind this?
There's quite a lot of speculation, but very little concrete information. Authorities keep saying that this is an investigation, an in-progress investigation, that they cannot release and divulge much information about the identity of the suspects. What we do know is that there might be foreign nationals involved, and we know that there are 4 individuals, at least, that took part in the operation itself. But the culture minister has said that this is definitely the work of professionals, of an experienced gang, that no one would actually have the audacity to come here and do what they did in 7 minutes and get away with it. So they must have had some kind of training or some kind of experience. But for now, at least, we don't really know much about who exactly did break into the Louvre on Sunday and stole those jewels.
Given how iconic the jewels actually are, is there some possibility that this is some sort of a statement potentially? Is there some political motivation that's behind this? You mentioned and we discussed about how France is currently in political turmoil. Is this aimed at French establishment perhaps?
It's very difficult to say. It's funny that you mentioned that, because the fact that the suspects, I'm not divulging their gender because we don't know at this stage, but 2 of the people that actually went into the gallery, they were wearing construction work vests. And we all remember, of course, the crisis that this country was plunged in when the yellow vests took to the streets and paralyzed France, demanding a more equal society. For now, at least, we haven't seen any kind of claim that this could be an act by that kind of movement. You would have to be very skilled to perform what was performed here. And so it's really difficult to say if this could have a political message underneath. What is clear is, once again, that this is a country that is shook by 4 people that managed to get away with so much of, in terms of value, but also in terms of history.
Anelise, if these jewels are, and it's very realistic, if they're never recovered, what is the cultural but also the symbolic loss, not just for France, but the art world at large that we're likely to see?
Well, as we talked about in the beginning of the segment, this, in terms of value, it's priceless. There is no way of putting a price on what was taken from the Gallery Apollyon in the Louvre. And so it's very difficult to calculate just how much loss in terms of culture. Emmanuel Macron himself said this is a part of France's heritage that was taken away, and that they're going to do everything in their power to bring it back. But once again, these are pieces that have been here for centuries and that many people want to see back. Authorities were talking about 60 officers involved in the quest. That seems terribly low for the size of what was lost. And so there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of attention. Many of the authorities that gave interviews today also talked about cooperating with European counterparts, because of course, European borders are easily crossed. And so these people could be in a very different country at this stage. But right now, what people or authorities here are focusing on is trying to explain that they are going to do everything in their power and that they can retrieve these pieces of art and history, as you said. One minister also said today that if by any chance these jewels are not returned, it's the equivalent of not rebuilding Notre Dame, is a piece of the patrimony, of the heritage of this country that is gone forever.
Anelise Borges in the Louvre in Paris, thank you so much for joining us. Excerpts from Nobody's Girl, a memoir penned by Jeffrey Epstein victim Virginia Giuffre, have been made public a day before its publication tomorrow. The book details liaisons with Prince Andrew, as well as the abuse endured from Epstein. Ms. Giuffre died by suicide in April of this year. And last week, Prince Andrew announced that he would no longer use his Duke of York title. For more on this story, we're joined from London by journalist and also royal commentator Afua Hagan. Afua, thank you so much for speaking to us. First of all, let's start with that reported police investigation. So how serious are these new claims about Prince Andrew allegedly asking a bodyguard to dig up dirt on Virginia Giuffre?
Listen, these claims are very serious, and now they're part of a Metropolitan Police investigation. So an email leak came out that said that Prince Andrew sent an email asking one of his personal protection officers that provided by the Metropolitan Police to look into Virginia Giuffre, provided her date of birth and her private and confidential social security number. And this is an example of something that happens to victims all the time, that their reputation is tried to be tarnished, that they're slandered so that they don't have credibility. And this was in the time just before we had a huge part of the Epstein scandal, where we had the picture of Prince Andrew with his arm around Virginia Giuffre's waist, a picture that she alleges was actually taken by Epstein on a Kodak camera, that detail coming from the book Nobody's Girl, like you mentioned. And so these claims are exceptionally serious. If Prince Andrew asked a member of the Metropolitan Police to dig into a private citizen, then perhaps other police officers knew about it as well. How high up did this go? Who knew that this was happening? As well as being morally wrong, this is illegal. And now that's what the Metropolitan Police are looking into.
Now, Afua, Prince Andrew has given up his royal titles. That decision, do you think that this was a personal choice, or was it pressure from within the palace to try to contain some of the damage that's kind of already been done?
Well, Prince Andrew's title is now in abeyance, like you rightly said, given up, not stripped from him. Listen, he would have wanted to hang on to those titles as long as he possibly could have. He would have hung on to them tooth and nail. This was definitely a decision that was made probably for him by King Charles III and Prince William, definitely instrumental in saying to him, look, we have reached a breaking point. There's too much embarrassment, too much heat around the firm at this time because of the steady drip, drip, drip of information we've had from the Epstein files. They are a terrible gift that just keeps on giving. And every week, it seems, sometimes every day, it seemed like we would have a new revelation, whether it was an email that Prince Andrew sent or Sarah Ferguson sent. And now, because of this memoir as well, more information coming out. The palace felt, the firm felt that enough was enough, that this had to stop, and this was going to perhaps draw a line underneath it. But that, in fact, is not what's happened. Yes, you know, his titles have been put into abeyance. He can't use a title of the Duke of York or anything relating to the Order of the Garter. He remains Prince Andrew because that title was one that was given to him as a birthright. But it doesn't stop the flow of information. It doesn't mean that Virginia Giuffre's memoir is not going to come out, because it is. But this was about the palace trying to distance themselves from Prince Andrew, but he still remains the king's brother. So how much can you do that?
There's calls as well from the Parliament, we've seen this, to create some sort of a clear system to strip royal titles, because this is not the first time we've seen this. Could this case finally push the monarchy towards some kind of reform in that regard?
I think it probably could. You know, there's been lots of calls from members of parliament. I've seen various ones talking about it today, saying there needs to be a simpler system in which you can strip a royal of their titles if they've brought, you know, the royal family into disrepute, which is what has happened here with Prince Andrew. So I think this occasion could hasten a conversation about modernising the system to make it easier to do that. I think that's partly why Prince Andrew's titles were put into abeyance instead of being stripped from him, because the process to do that in Parliament is so long and is so convoluted. It was quicker and more effective, perhaps it was felt, to put them into abeyance, say that he's just not going to use them. But I definitely think this is going to hasten a conversation in Parliament to make that process easier and quicker to be done if it needs to.
Afua, with Virginia Giuffre's memoir being released tomorrow, we'll all know what's in that. How damaging could the contents be, not just for Andrew, but I think for the royal family at large, because it is years after that initial settlement was made?
Even though it is years after that initial settlement, this book and the context of it kind of reminds us of that settlement, reminds us of everything that happened. And you get some real details, some things that we already know. For instance, Virginia Giuffre talking about the three sexual encounters she had with Prince Andrew, that she alleges she had with Prince Andrew. And we have to say that he denies all the allegations against him. But she talks about it in the book, but she gives us more context. One of the encounters she alleges happened with him and, you know, lots of other people. So basically she's describing an orgy. She also goes into much more detail about what she experienced with Epstein, who was a convicted paedophile, you know, saying that she thought she would die a sex slave. Some of the details are really, really dreadful and really harrowing. And so this is a reminder of that settlement, but a reminder of what Virginia Giuffre went through, of what she went through in her life. What she talked about is all laid out in this book. It's extremely, extremely damaging, but more so, it's extremely distressing to read that this woman at a very young age experienced such terrible things and felt that throughout her life she couldn't get any kind of justice for it.
The bigger picture here, Afua, what does it mean for the monarchy and for their image at large as well? Are we seeing a turning point in how the royal family deals with scandal and also with accountability, because this is such a public case and there's kind of going to be no getting away from this tomorrow?
This is going to have to be a turning point for the royal family. It's going to have to be a point where they look at how they handle crisis management and how they remain accountable, how they are accountable to the British people, not just the British people, to everybody that they deign to reign over across the Commonwealth. This has to be a lesson in how they are accountable. And this has to be a point where they look at how they've acted in the past, how they've acted in this situation, and how they are going to act going forward. It's critical at this time that the firm takes a long, hard look at itself, holds a mirror up to itself, and looks at how it deals with members of the family who may or may not have committed crimes, who are caught up in scandal, how they can deal with that and how they remain authentic in doing that is absolutely essential. It's critical at this point. And this will lead to modernization of how they remain authentic and how they deal with crisis management.
Now, Prince Andrew stepping back from his titles is what we've seen happen. Is that going to be enough to protect the monarchy, or will King Charles III be forced to step in and do something else here? And we did mention at the very start of this, he is a prince by birthright. There is no way that that can be stripped for somebody who's not exactly au fait with the monarchy, as I may be.
Well, you can do that in Parliament. Like I said earlier, it's a very long, convoluted process, and perhaps we might see the modernisation of that process so it can be done quicker, so it can be easier. So someone who has brought the royal family into disrepute can be stripped of those titles much easier. In terms of what else King Charles III can do in this situation, yes, it would be that. He could strip Andrew of his birthright. Andrew lives in Royal Lodge, a 30-bed bedroom, grand palatial house that he lives in. He has a private lease on that till 2078. So there isn't really much anything that King Charles can do about that. We will not see Prince Andrew at any royal events or family occasions, whether that's Christmas at Sandringham, whether that be a wedding, a funeral, anything like that. We will not see Prince Andrew pictured with any of the senior royals. So there will be a full-on ban we can expect of him to be able to attend any of those events. Other than that, there really isn't anything else that King Charles III can do. He could perhaps send him off to exile with Sarah Ferguson to live somewhere else. But Prince Andrew still remains to be King Charles III's brother, and he still has that prince title, which is his birthright. Stripping him of that prince title is something that could be done. That's something that Virginia Giuffre's family have called for as well. But like I said, it's a very long process. But we could see the modernisation of Parliament to make that process easier.
Afua Hagan, journalist and royal commentator. I'm sure there'll be more on this story as it develops through the week once those memoirs are revealed tomorrow. Thank you for chatting to us. Now to China, where in Beijing, President Xi Jinping has delivered opening remarks to China's Communist Party as major officials meet to approve the draft of the country's next 5-year plan. The 4-day meeting brings together some 200 voting and 107 alternate members of the Communist Party's Central Committee, and they will determine the future development path of the country. Yaz Kaminzin-Brumby has this report.
It's set to be one of the most important meetings here in Beijing, not just this year, but in the last few years as well. That's because in the next few days and today, even behind closed doors, in meeting rooms, the top Chinese leaders, members and cadres of the CCP are going to be discussing China's next 5-year plan. 5-year plan, what does that mean? Well, this is essentially the guidebook, the roadmap for the way in which China is set to develop moving forward, for its domestic politics, its domestic economy, but also for its relations with its neighbours and also other countries like the United States. And that means this really is a big deal. Now, these meetings are taking place behind closed doors. It's very difficult for anyone to guess what they could be talking about, but we can get an idea by looking at the last 5-year plan and see what was being discussed then on the table. Then was this idea of high quality development, of bringing up that socioeconomic level of people around the country through things like technological advancement, attempts also at keeping unemployment low, and of course economic growth as well. This meeting all coming as well at a time of heightened tensions between the United States and China, and coming just a few days before what could be a potential meeting between Chinese President Xi and US President Donald Trump at the sidelines of the APEC summit in South Korea. Not many details are going to be coming out in the next few days, not many details even in the next few weeks, although there are expected to be some trickling of information in the future. But we do think that around March, we're going to have a better idea what's being discussed right now here in Beijing as China lays out its plan for the future.
Jan Kaminzin-Brumby reporting there for us. All right, let's take a look at the top business news of today. Amazon Web Services have fixed the underlying problem which disrupted some of the world's biggest websites and online applications. The blackout crashed multiple platforms like Snapchat, Duolingo and Roblox. Multiple banks, mobile phone networks and also the video platform Zoom were among those websites affected. And turning to sport now. The Israeli Premier League derby between Maccabi and Hapoel was cancelled on Sunday after violent riots and unrest. Smoke grenades were thrown into the pitch, injuring 12 fans and 3 officers. At least 9 people have been arrested. The trouble comes after the UK barred Maccabi fans from attending the Europa League match next month. And a reminder of our top stories this evening. President Trump says the Gaza ceasefire remains in place. That's despite recent strikes as Witkoff and Kushner arrive in Israel. 8 priceless jewels are stolen from the Louvre Museum as police continue to hunt down the culprits to recover the artefacts. And the Epstein victims speaking out from beyond the grave. Virginia Giuffre's memoirs are revealed, detailing damning allegations against Prince Andrew. And that's all from us on W News for now. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel as always. You can follow us on X. The Real Deal with Tom Burgess-Watson is on the way next, and we'll be back in just a couple of hours with W News Extra. But for now, goodbye.